Hello everyone. I welcome you all to the ICANN initiative. First of all, thank you so much for many of you have wished for the speedy recovery, and yes, I have not been keeping well for almost 1 week now. So now I'm recovering, and so we'll be starting from today. But because we have not been doing it from Thursday, so it's Thursday, Friday, Saturday, and Monday. So we have not covered 4 days newspaper, and I will not be covering them. Reason one being that yes, because I was not well and I was not able to do the initiative. So now you know how the newspaper backlog is. So once a backlog, it's always a backlog. So it's not going to happen. And also because I'm working now, so there's a lot of work pressure also. And secondly, I just went through broadly the titles of the editorials that were there since Friday, and most of the articles were on the American elections, speculating what's going to happen in the elections or who is going to win. And later on, once the elections happened and the results were out, so just speculating how India-US relations can turn out based on who the president-elect is. So these kinds of questions will not be coming in the UPSC. So half of the editorials were about that. And next, there were a lot of articles on the Bihar elections. Again, what's going to happen, the political kind of editorials, again, which are not important. Thirdly, there were a lot of articles on the COVID-19, how it is taking shape, about the winter peak which might happen again, the resurgence that's happening in several cities now, and also about the latest developments that are happening in the vaccines, the efforts for which are being made across the world. So again, these were the three major heads under which there were several editorials written across Indian Express and Hindu. So they were not important from the exam point of view, and the other small tidbits of news which we can cover from today. So if somebody really wants to go back and start reading from Thursday's newspaper, you're most welcome to do that. But I will not be covering from Thursday. We will be starting again from today. So today we'll be doing Tuesday's newspaper. So that is today's newspaper we'll be covering today. And once again, thank you so much for all the wishes that you have given for my speedy recovery. And I really hope that helps me to recover and come back more energetically. So now let's start with the topics of the day. Let's start with the first topic of the day. This is about development versus environment. Previously in the ICANN, we have seen several examples of development versus the environment, where we might undertake some infrastructure developmental projects in order to ensure better connectivity and industrial development and generation of jobs. But at the same time, the same might be harming the environment, leading to environmental degradation. So there is always a collision between the two, whether we need to give preference to environment or development. In this regard, particularly when it comes to the Western Ghats, we have had panels like the Kasturi Rangan panel, the Madhav Gadgil panel, and they have come out with their own recommendations about how much of developmental activities should take place in such ecologically sensitive areas. So all of this we have already previously discussed. So what we're going to be discussing today is an example that you can use in your GS syllabus 3. So whenever there is any question which is asking you the dilemma between development and environment and saying that the developmental projects are actually harming the environment, you can quote this example. So this example is about a 6-lane highway that is being proposed in the state of Karnataka. This is proposed between two districts, and in the area that this 6-lane highway is going to pass through, that area is ecologically sensitive, as in there are many protected habitats that come in this zone, which includes the Bhadra Tiger Reserve, it includes the Kudremukh National Park, it also includes the Pushpagiri Wildlife Sanctuary. So all of these protected areas fall within this 6-lane highway that is being planned in Karnataka. So therefore it is going to pass through, the highway is going to pass through a region that has a lot of wildlife population. So this is going to have a lot of repercussions on the wildlife population in the region. So let's understand these repercussions. First is this area, the Pushpagiri Wildlife Sanctuary, is known for its Asiatic elephant population, and similarly the Bhadra Tiger Reserve is a tiger reserve, and the tiger density in the tiger reserve has been increasing and hosts a very good population of tigers. So this is a region that is very rich in its wildlife population of tigers and Asiatic elephants. So they are going to be harmed through such projects. Second is a movement. So these are those kind of protected areas which are contiguous to one another, which are in a way connected through corridors with one another. So by constructing a highway through these protected areas, the movement of the wildlife is going to be affected. This is a second repercussion. The third is, many of the experts have also felt that this is going to further exacerbate the human-elephant conflict that is already happening in the region. There have been several elephant deaths that have happened in the region because the elephants come in the roads and they become part of the roadkill, or that they are harming the crops in the region. So the human-elephant conflict has already been there in this region, which is further going to increase because of this proposed highway. Next is, of course, the animals. They try to cross the road and go to the other side of the road, to the other side of the forest, and in that process they will become road killed. And also this makes this protected areas more accessible to the poachers and more accessible to the smugglers who would be smuggling timbers, who would be poaching the animals, poaching the elephants for their tusks. So all of these kinds of criminal activities may also increase if such developmental projects are going to increase the accessibility to these protected areas. Also, it is seen that much of the area through which this highway is planned, that falls under the moderate to severe landslide susceptibility area. So therefore, the carving of such highway within these protected areas could also make the region more unstable, and it could also make the area much more susceptible to landslides, which is again a disaster, and this is further going to harm the wildlife population in the region. So these are the various repercussions of this single developmental project that is being formed. So through this example, you can use it as a case study to show how developmental projects can actually harm the wildlife population. Now let's move on to the next topic. The next topic is about the ethical dilemmas. So basically this whole editorial was about the NGT banning the firecrackers to be used coming Diwali, because the pollution levels in some of the cities, especially Delhi, has worsened a lot, because it's also the winter that's approaching, and the stubble burning has started to happen in Punjab and Haryana. And apart from this, if in Diwali the firecrackers are burst on a large scale, it is going to create a lot of problems of pollution in the capital and in the surrounding regions and the surrounding states. So based upon this, the NGT has now banned the bursting of firecrackers. So in this case, there is a dilemma, the ethical dilemma that we see in this. So in fact, in your GS paper 4, your ethics paper, you may be asked a very simple direct question that what according to you is an ethical dilemma and how do you resolve? Explain it with an example. So this can be used as an example on how you are many times in our day-to-day lives as policymakers in the future. You will be facing several ethical dilemmas, and how best we can resolve them by trying to balance both the sides of the equation. In this case, it's about the firecracker industry. So on the one hand, the firecracker industry employs a large number of people. In fact, the 90% of the firecracker industry employees are in Tamil Nadu. So it's very much about the question of job and employment. And if the firecracker industry doesn't function during Diwali, then what about these employees who are working in the Sivkasi firecracker industry in Tamil Nadu? What will happen to them? How will they feed their families if they lose their jobs and employment? That is the first thing. Second is about the economy. The firecracker industry is in a lot of boom during the Diwali season, and a lot of people buy firecrackers in India. So, in fact, in Tamil Nadu itself, or the entire firecracker industry is estimated to be around 2,300 crore worth of output is because of the firecracker industry. So, this is a huge amount, and there is a good amount of economy that's built around the firecracker industry. It is because of the demand from the side of the people who are demanding the firecrackers, and due to which the economics is also a very huge component that is involved. But on the other side of the equation is the health. So, if we burst firecrackers, it is going to lead to a lot of health related issues. It is going to worsen the air pollution. It is going to create troubles for the asthma patients, for people who are having cardiovascular diseases. So, it is going to create a lot of health troubles as well. So, when we compare these two, on the one hand, firecracker industry is generating a lot of employment and it supports a certain amount of economy. But however, it is also leading to several health issues, like it is worsening the breathing problems and asthma and all that. So in such case, do you really have to support the firecracker industry, or should we shut it down? So this is a classic example of an ethical dilemma that you might face tomorrow as a district collector of your own district also. So in such, how you would have to come out with a way forward. So whenever you are facing such a dilemma, the best way forward is try to minimize the loss and try to maximize the gain. So this is the best thing that we can do. And for this, again, we have to work from both the demand side as well as from the supply side. So if I say from the demand side, the demand for the firecrackers itself should reduce, and that should happen by increasing the awareness about how firecrackers and its excessive use can cause problems of air pollution and breathing difficulties among patients, among children and the elderly. Similarly, we also have to tackle the supply side. So what will happen to the people who are now working in the firecracker industry? They will be losing their employment. So in the short term, we also need to think about compensation and relief to be provided to these people who might lose jobs in case the firecracker industry is shut down or at least scaled down. And in the meantime, we also have to think about alternatives because of two reasons. One, that any kind of compensation or relief that is being provided to the employees, that is not going to be a sustainable long-term solution. It is only going to be a short-term solution. Second reason why we need to think about alternatives is because it's not that today I start creating awareness about the harmful nature of firecrackers and tomorrow people are going to stop burning crackers. That is not going to happen. So that is the reason why both from the demand and the supply side, it shows that we need to think about the alternatives. So there are green crackers that have come up, so that will cause less pollution. So we need to try and think about various alternatives that on the one hand give pleasure to the people of burning a firecracker, but on the other hand are not so polluting the environment. So this is how we need to think of the way forward. So whenever we are thinking of the way forward, always remember the thumb rule that the way forward will have to balance the various conflicting interests, so that no one's interest is completely compromised to protect the interest of the another. So in this case, the thumb rule is to minimize the pain and to maximize the pleasure. So now let's move on to the next topic. Now this topic is about similar to the previous one, which is about the air pollution. So this again is a part of your GS3 syllabus. So in fact, this whole editorial mainly talked about three important issues which we face when we talk about tackling air pollution in India. So at the outset, it begins by saying that our Finance Minister Nirmala Sitharaman had announced a 4,400 crore worth of package, and that much amount is only towards tackling air pollution in 102 cities which are worst affected from air pollution in India. So this is going to happen under a program that's called as National Clean Air Program. So the aim of this program is to reduce the particulate matter 2.5 PM 2.5 by 20 to 30%. It has to be reduced from its 2017 levels, and this reduction has to be attained by 2024. So the objective of the National Clean Air Program is to tackle the particulate matter PM 2.5 pollution in these 102 most polluted cities by bringing down the PM 2.5 levels by at least 20 to 30% from its 2017 levels by 2024. So this is the whole package and what its objective is. And then this article goes on to highlight some of the important issues that tackling air pollution in India is going. The first thing is about the data availability. In this regard, the article mentions about two research agencies. One is called as the Carbon Copy and the other is called as the Respire Living. So these are the two research agencies, and what these two research agencies have found is that out of 122 cities whose data was actually collected and analyzed, only 59 cities of these 122 cities had data about PM 2.5 available with them. For the rest of the cities, there was no data available about how much is the concentration of PM 2.5 in the environment. So first of all, data availability about the prevalence of the particulate matter particles, about the prevalence of various pollutants in general itself is absent. When we cannot exactly measure the extent of the pollution itself because of non-availability of data, then forget about thinking of measures to tackle that air pollution. So first is the non-availability of data itself. The second issue is about measuring the pollution. As we just said that without data, how is it possible for us to measure the pollution? So what happens in measuring the pollution is historically, we have been relying on manual machines. So these manual machines have been measuring the concentration of the pollutants, but this has been very, very inadequate. We need more sophisticated machines to measure the amount of or the extent of pollution in the environment. But most of these machines are now imported in India, as we do not have an Indian version of these machines. Of course, many institutions in India like the Indian Institute of Technology, Kanpur, is already putting a lot of efforts to come out with the indigenous versions of the machine so that we don't have to import machines to measure pollution. But however, they are still happening. They are going to be low cost ones, but then this is still in the process. So as of now, to measure pollution also, we are relying on machines which are being imported from abroad, which is again going to add to the cost of tackling the entire pollution. The third issue is the funding. Now, the amount that we just saw in the last slide of 4,400 crore might appear very attractive and very much sufficient to tackle just air pollution. But if we think of all the costs that are involved, the fund is actually not sufficient to tackle air pollution. Now, if we have to import machines to measure pollution, and India has one of the highest number of cities which are worst polluted, then a lot of resources, a lot of money is going to just go into importing the machines from abroad. So out of all these funding, the funding is not sufficient to, in fact, or it doesn't take care the requirement of training the manpower and also the need to maintain the systems which have already been put in place. The maintenance and training the manpower, all of these are things which require a lot of funding, but then the amount of funding that is allotted to this does not take into account these kinds of ancillary things. So that again makes it very problematic to completely understand the problem of air pollution per se in India. So these were the three important issues that were discussed in this article. Now let's move on to the next topic. This topic is about manufacturing. So manufacturing comes under your GS paper 3. You may have a generic question about what ails the Indian manufacturing sector, what are the factors that hinder the growth of the Indian manufacturing sector. So what needs to be done in this regard? So whenever we talk of the manufacturing sector, there are two countries whose examples we always read about. One is Vietnam and the other is Bangladesh. So these two countries have been doing really well when it comes to the manufacturing sector, and also the kind of growth that the exports in these countries have seen is tremendous, and there are a lesson or two that India can learn from these countries that can help to make the Indian manufacturing sector pick up. So that is what this whole article is about. As the title itself suggests, that lessons from Vietnam and Bangladesh that India can learn from these countries. So why is it that we are learning from countries like Vietnam and Bangladesh? Because as I just said, that they have been doing tremendously well when it comes to their manufacturing sector. So Bangladesh has now become the second largest apparel exporter in the world, only next to China. And Vietnam has seen a 240% growth in its exports So this shows how these two countries have been doing extremely well when it comes to manufacturing and exports. Now this brings us to the policies that these countries, this is Vietnam and Bangladesh, that these countries have been following and that India can take some cues from. One is the open trade policy. Vietnam, for example, follows what is called as an open trade policy, which means it is going to have free trade agreements. It has free trade agreements with the largest importers of the Vietnamese products. So with the Europe, with the United States, it has free trade agreements, and therefore all of the Vietnamese exports into these countries with which Vietnam has free trade agreements is going to be imported duty free. So because the imports of the Vietnamese goods are going to be duty free, they are going to be priced at a competitive rates at the global market. So this is one policy that Vietnam follows. Second is also the fact that these countries have been very much welcoming of the foreign firms. So the foreign firm comes and they are treated at par with the domestic firms so that there is a healthy competition and the overall cost of production comes down. This is a second strategy that they have adopted. Third is, of course, the inexpensive workforce. So the workforce is trained, and is also the rates are kept low so that various manufacturers and the companies, they get attracted to these countries because of the cost of manufacturing being very low. And the reason why the cost of manufacturing is low is because the workforce is very inexpensive. And the fourth, and something that India can really learn from, is the fact that these countries have large firms. So the state focuses on the large firms, which gets more incentives. So through this, the large firms are able to produce, that quality of the produce is going to be better. So in India, a lot of the manufacturing happens with the MSMEs, and it is difficult to ensure the quality of produce, and also it is difficult to reduce the cost of production, because it's only when the firms are larger that economies of scale will come into operation. But smaller firms, the cost of production per unit is going to be higher. So with larger firms, the economies of scale will come into operation and the cost of production per unit is going to go down. So these countries are incentivizing large firms, and it is the large firms which are doing very well in these countries, and they are exporting the bulk of the manufacturing output from these countries. So these are some of the things that India can learn from these countries. This article in the end also offers a very good solution that I liked, which is about establishing sectoral industrial zones. Now, sectoral industrial zones means that let's say there is a sectoral industrial zone which is meant for the sector of automobile. So in the sectorial industrial zone, there will be many factory spaces. So if tomorrow, if I decide that I want to establish an automobile business, I will just be going to this industrial zone and pick up any of these factory places, and I must be good to function within a matter of few weeks. I should not be worrying about the land that I have to acquire to set up my factory. I should not be worried about the various permissions and approvals that I have to take. So only thing is, I will just go to the industrial zones, and various factory spaces are already pre-approved factory spaces are available. I'm just going to take any one of them, and I'm going to start my business within a few weeks time. So this is a very well meaning suggestion that has been offered in this article, that you can quote in the way forward in your answers. So we must have sectoral industrial zones, and within this we must have pre-approved factory spaces. So anybody who wants to do business will just go and occupy these factory spaces, and should be good to do business within a matter of few weeks, without worrying about any approvals or any permissions, and without worrying about any land acquisition for setting up the factory. So this was about the manufacturing and the lessons that we can learn from Vietnam and Bangladesh. Now we move on to the next topic. Now this is the last topic. We'll be talking about India-Maldives relation. So the reason we are talking about India-Maldives relation is because India's Foreign Secretary Harshvardhan Shringla had visited Maldives, and during the visit 4 important agreements have been signed, which had been discussed before also. So these agreements have now been formally signed. So we'll be discussing about these 4 things. So the 4 agreement, one is the connectivity project which India is going to be investing in, which is the Greater Malay Connectivity Project. It's a $500 million package. So now $100 million grant has now been signed for this. And India is also offering a $400 million line of credit from India's Exim Bank to Maldives. And the third is about the creation of an air bubble between India and Maldives. So air bubble, it just means that there is going to be regularity of flights flying between India and Maldives. So Maldives says that this is very good thing for Maldives because it's going to improve the incoming tourists to Maldives, and because Maldives lot of GDP is generated with the help of tourism itself. So creation of an air bubble is going to boost the tourists footfall on Maldives. So this is again going to help the Maldives economy. And the last is about the community development project. For that also MOU has now been signed during the foreign secretary's visit to Maldives. And the next thing that the article is talking about is the India First foreign policy of Maldives. Now, when the previous government was there in Maldives, it had a kind of China tilt toward in its governance. So it was allowing a lot of Chinese projects to be taken up in Maldives. But now the Soli administration, which is now in power in Maldives, has a kind of an India tilt, and it is adopting a foreign policy that is popularly termed as India First foreign policy, where a lot of importance is being given to India and India's investments in Maldives. So India has also said that just like Maldives has an India First policy, similarly India also has a neighborhood first policy, in which India is giving additional and extra importance to the countries which are in India's neighborhood. So as a part of this policy, even Maldives is very central to India's foreign policy as a part of the neighborhood policy. So these two policies, that is India First policy of Maldives and neighborhood policy of India, are very much in sync with each other, and that is how both the countries have given a lot of importance to the other country. So this India First policy of Maldives has to be quoted in your answer, so don't forget that. So this was about the India-Maldives relations. Even before, we have discussed multiple times in the ICANN videos about the India-Maldives relation. Apart from this, in the last four, since Thursday, Friday, Saturday and on Monday, there were many articles about the US elections, who is going to win, and all those politically related articles about the United States, about Democrats, about Republicans, who is going to win, what is going to happen in the future. So all of those speculative kind of articles, if Biden wins, then what is it for India? But UPSC doesn't ask questions on what might happen if there is a change in the administration in the United States. So as and when things become clear in the future, that's when things, when they gain more clarity, that's when we can have a good analysis. So such speculative questions will not be asked in your mains. So we won't be discussing any of those articles that just speculate that, okay, if Biden comes to power or becomes a president, then these changes may happen. So as and when that happen, that is when we will be discussing them. So we won't indulge in such hypothesis that this might happen if there is a change in the administration and all that. So these kind of articles were large in number. Then again, there were articles on the Bihar elections. There were a lot of articles, in fact, on Bihar elections, which again we're not going to discuss as it's not important from the exam point of view. Third, there were a lot of articles on the COVID-19, of course, and the recent things that are going on with the winter coming up and the development of vaccine that's happening. So there were a lot of articles on that. So basically, there's not much to lose since Thursday. So if you want, I would ask you to go and read from Thursday if you have that much amount of time, but otherwise it's not really important. Most of the articles were based on these kinds of things only. So that is completely okay. It's not that UPSC is going to pick up a question and ask from Thursday, Friday and Saturday's newspaper only. So keep whatever now we'll do, let's keep it, let's try to keep it as consistent as possible. So, and because we have just started with today and I'm still recovering, we'll start with the questions and asking questions and discussing the answers from tomorrow. So I'll be ending the video with this. Yeah, this is what I said, the real significance of Biden win. So again, it's just talking about the fact that if Biden is becoming the president, then the US administration is going to go tough on India's human right record. So what's happening in Kashmir, what's happening in the Northeast, what's happening with the minorities. So US will question the Indian authorities whenever the talks will happen between the two. So such human right things will be questioned by the United States, and US is more willing to cooperate with the other countries as far as climate change is concerned, and US administration may go softer on China. What is going to happen to Quad? So all of these kinds of things, as and when they happen, let's discuss that. So these were the other articles that were again not really important. Lot of article again on United States elections, Bihar elections. So that's it, nothing much. So that's it for today. Thank you.